What is going on? Welcome to the Flex Network. I'm joined, as always, by Alvin Kamara, aka Season Long Sez. How you doing, brother?
Hello. What's up, my friend Shane? You ready to continue our off-season discussion about NFL fantasy football?
Oh, I'm excited. So, yes, I am Shane Seeley at Seeley_Shane. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at the Flex Network 1. And of course, we're missing in action, our boy Flex Mad, who is still, I think he's doing some moving or something like that. But hopefully he'll be able to join us next week.
Excuse. I mean, are we sure that guy's even into football anymore? I mean, he's not like a full-on wrestling commentator at this point.
Those Seahawks are out, so, he's not really too engaged anymore, I don't imagine. But, yeah, man. So I thought it'd be a good idea to jump on here and just have a quick discussion with you about some of these fantasy relevant free agents going into the 2020 offseason here. So not sure if you had a chance to look at the list. I'm sure you have familiarized yourself. You have not. So
I have. I have the list in front of me.
Okay, excellent. So those of you who are watching on YouTube and on Facebook, I'm going to include the link to a shared drive. So if you want to go and look at the at what we're looking at, essentially, feel free. We can do that after I've completed recording here.
You can also put that link in the description in the audio in the Podbean feed or whatever podcast feed that they're in.
That is my plan for sure. So I figured let's just go through and we'll go through some of the positions. We'll go start with quarterback, go through running back, wide receiver, tight ends, that sort of thing. We don't have to go into super detail with a lot of them because frankly, most of them aren't going to really have a major impact day to day on your fantasy team, but certainly some will. And as it pertains, say, for example, to the quarterback position, it might not even necessarily be the player himself, but the supporting cast. So let's not bury the lead here. Let's get going with the QB position. So I have Dak Prescott as probably the most fantasy relevant QB going into the 2020 offseason. I don't think there's anybody out there that believes that Dallas is not going to get this guy locked up. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that they're going to either franchise him and figure it out next year when they have some more salary cap room, or figure out a way to sign him. I don't think there's much to see here. He'll be a Dallas Cowboy when the season starts next year,
so.
and I think he'll be probably a top 7 fantasy QB drafted as such. So.
Yeah.
I don't think
I'm bullish on the guy. He's already 27. He's sneaky older than you would have thought. But I guess that's what happens with these free agents, right? Is that's right around that age where, and he wasn't a first round pick either, which means they don't have that 5th-year option on him. So that's huge. But you got to think, like, the Dallas Cowboys are not going to mess this one up, right? Like, Dak's his guy.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I don't think we should spend a ton of time on it. Mostly, like I said, because they still have that franchise tag they could use on him. Yeah. Next year, it's a more interesting discussion if they do use the franchise tag on him this year. But he's going to be in a Dallas uniform, throwing the ball. It'll be interesting to see what they do with Cooper. They have Zeke locked up long term right now, and with Mike McCarthy there, I'm a little less bullish than I was on the Dallas offense. But we'll see.
Sometimes these guys just get recycled. I mean, it's crazy that Mike McCarthy, just a year ago was like, okay, get this guy out of Green Bay. Then all of a sudden he's this coveted free agent coach going into Dallas. I don't know. I'm not too excited about it, but
no. I mean, Mike McCarthy, seems like a good leader of men, sort of old school football guy. But when it comes to, down and distance decisions and, he kind of threw out the word analytics, and I'm not going to be quick to pile on Mike McCarthy, but it's just when you have peak Aaron Rodgers and you only get one Super Bowl, only get there once, what would Bill Belichick have done with peak Aaron Rodgers for his career? There was so many the football decisions that didn't make sense that even you and I, from our eyes, from many people that we trust and like on Twitter, there was so many non-optimal decisions made. So we'll see. Maybe a year off in football did him good. Maybe he learned his lessons and move in there. Who else you got?
So lesson number 1 is feed Aaron Jones the ball. Good things will happen. Okay, so next up we got Jameis Winston as my number 2. I think this is a big deal, obviously, because you kind of want him in Tampa, right? For your Chris Godwin, your Mike Evans shares.
Yeah. I don't know if I said it to you when we last met a couple weeks ago, But I think that I'm not so sure Jameis is going to end up in Tampa. I mean, he very well could be, but if they've had enough there, there'll be plenty of teams that want Jameis Winston. Specifically, they're building that new stadium in Los Angeles for the Chargers, and they're going to need somebody to be, the jersey seller there. I mean, Jameis Winston with the young weapons in LA Chargers could be good too. And I think, and we haven't, when we get to him, we could talk about it in more detail. But if Brady does not go back to New England, I think this could be a spot for him with, if he just wants to, hey, I want one more team, one shot without Belichick, and I want to do it with young, good weapons. I think that we could see him, the quarterback carousel, him land in Tampa.
Do you think that just with Jameis Winston, do you think this guy's capable of winning a Super Bowl in the right situation?
Yeah, I do. He's a good quarterback. I mean, he has the opposite thing that Alex Smith has. Alex Smith, everyone's like, oh, Alex Smith, Aaron Rodgers, they don't, they only get like 4 or 5 interceptions a year. That's not good. Like there's a right amount of interceptions that you want the quarterback to have. Like he is the ultimate chance taker, whereas some of those guys that we just mentioned are non-chance takers. So, I think he can, he's good enough to win a Super Bowl with the right cast around him.
He reminds me of a guy like Ryan Fitzpatrick. It's just everything everything kind of has to line up perfectly. But I guess you could say that about a lot of teams, right? Okay, moving on. Next is the old grizzled vet Drew Brees. And I mean, this is an interesting situation. He's a free agent. I think, frankly, he's going to be back in New Orleans. I'd be shocked if he doesn't sign back with them. They just have such a defined culture there. This year, frankly, it was an upset, the fact that they got knocked out of the playoffs. But what they have going with Michael Thomas right now, I do not think they want to mess that up.
Yeah, and again, it's Brees, if he decides to come back, which we both think he will, should be in New Orleans. But based on what we saw, like those older pocket passer guys, like I said, I'm not sure you can win with them right now. Taysom Hill in that last game was definitely the better guy at the position, and that ball that he threw that big bomb to was an ugly looking ball. But I think the expectation is Brees will be back in New Orleans. You said it perfectly.
Well, I mean, they've got the defense, and that's what it takes to win a championship. A solid defense. They have a pretty solid offense, obviously. Like Alvin Kamara, I think, he was a disappointment this year in fantasy, but he's still a very good player, and he's going to be around. Where
do you think Alvin Kamara gets drafted next year in redraft leagues?
I think just name value alone is going to be in the first round, but I bet you it's going to be late first round. People are probably pretty snake bitten by him.
Yeah, I mean, he did finish strong, though, so sometimes that goes away. It's similar to, Joe Mixon, had a disappointing first 10 games, and then, he finished the year with 6 really strong games, and, I think Joe Mixon actually finds his way back into the first round, but we won't get too off track here. Is there, instead of going through each of the quarterbacks, as you look at your list, is there anyone that pops out there as an interesting free agent?
There's the 2 old men, right? Like there's Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers. I mean, who knows where they're going to go? They might stay put. They might go somewhere else. But from a fantasy relevant perspective, I think that those are the kind of guys that you want on your team to help your supporting cast of wide receivers and running backs. I mean, people kind of shat on Phillip Rivers this year because he had such a down year. The question is it just a blip, or is it age finally catching up? Brady, same sort of thing, right?
Yeah. And I think Brady, the situation was that just the weapons were below even the threshold. I mean, they tried. I mean, they spent the second round pick on Mohamed Sanu. I think we all thought that was an overpay. It just didn't work out. That's not what they needed. Julian Edelman, remember that game against the Titans, Julian Edelman drops that pass that he doesn't normally drop. And then we could be talking about, the Patriots moving on. So I still think Tom Brady's all right. I just think they need to get him. I mean, it's obvious take. They need to get him some dynamic weapons. I mean, think about how they spent their draft resources the last 2 years, Shane. They took Sony Michel over Nick Chubb. You're on mute, just so you know. I see your lips moving. They took N'Keal Harry over AJ Brown, over Deebo Samuel. So they misfired on their 2 first round picks in the last 2 years. They spent their second round pick upcoming on Mohamed Sanu. That didn't work out. So now you're talking about 3 premium picks on offense that just so far haven't panned out. It's hard to go 0 for 3 on that, and they tried. They signed Antonio Brown. It worked out for a game. They couldn't sustain him there. So yeah, I think Tom Brady is going to be all right. Philip Rivers starting to look like how Eli started looking about 6 years ago. I'm less optimistic on him. How about Tannehill? How about Ryan?
Yeah, so that's the guy I'm interested in. I think he's back in Tennessee. I mean, I'd be shocked if they don't at least franchise take him, but they want to see what they got with him. The other guy, Marcus Mariota, he's also a free agent at the very bottom of my list here. He's gone, right?
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Mariota will get a backup job somewhere. I think that he will be the backup in either New England or New York Giants. I think those are the two spots that I see him landing. Yeah, backing up Daniel Jones. It's a similar skill set, mobile QB. And he failed expectation. He failed to meet expectations, Marcus Mariota, that is in the NFL. But I think that he's been around. He's a veteran enough, and he's the perfect guy to back up Daniel Jones. So that's where I see him falling.
All right. So just some of the other free agents, just to kind of note that they're out there. Guys like Kyle Allen, Taysom Hill, Teddy Bridgewater. I mean, they're not super fantasy relevant, but it's just going to be interesting to see how that whole New Orleans situation plays out. So going to move on to running back. So and again, number one here, I was
just going to say, instead of going down the list, why don't you pick a couple of guys and we can talk about them and say, hey, this guy, which one of the, and there's a great list. There's a big list of, just which ones are the most interesting to you. We can kind of have a conversation like that.
Sure. Okay. Well, really it's the top 4 or 5 guys that I've got listed here. So we've got Melvin Gordon, Derrick Henry, Kareem Hunt, Austin Eckler, Kenyan Drake. I mean, these are all guys that have flashed in fantasy. They've been fantasy relevant for a number of years. They're all relatively young. I mean, the oldest guy on that list is Melvin Gordon. He's 27. Derrick Henry's only 26, but Kareem Hunt, Austin Eckler, they're both 25. Kenyan Drake's 26. I'll even throw Matt Breida in there at 25 years old. I mean, these are all guys that if they go to the right spots, or in some cases like Melvin Gordon or even Austin Eckler end up staying put, I mean, these guys are major fantasy contributors, and I think that it's exciting.
Yeah, and I agree with you. But Melvin Gordon, that's the guy I want to talk about. I would give such a small chance he's in Los Angeles Chargers.
Like 0.00. Right.
So where does he go? You hear Tampa, you hear this thing. Who do you think is going to pay him top money? Who's actually interested in him at the salary he's going to want?
Well, I guess that's the question. What is he going to want? Like, is he going to want more than $10 million a year at this point in his career? Like that's the tough question.
It's a tough year to be a free agent running back, as there's about 4 running backs coming into this 2020 class that I've identified early on that could walk in and do the job right away. I mean, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, who's the kid from Travis Etienne is going back to school.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's one less guy.
I think what's interesting is that you kind of look at who's in the playoffs right now, and you look at what their running back situation is, right? So you've got the San Francisco 49ers who are still in it, and I guess we're recording this the Sunday morning before the championship games. So depending on when you listen to this, they may or may not, still be in the playoffs. But you look at that, and they're the definition of a committee, right? So that's an example of where running back, frankly, doesn't matter. As long as you've got a system in place, that's going to help. But on the other end, you've got Aaron Jones, you've got Derrick Henry. I mean, these are guys who, Derrick Henry is the reason they're in the conference championship, right?
Yes.
So you just wonder what formula these teams are going to want to go out. Do they want to go in and spend all this money? I mean, since day one, pretty much the Jets have been saying, we don't want Le'Veon Bell because of his contract, right?
Yeah, but who's going to trade? Who's going to trade for that contract?
But what I'm saying is that's a perfect example, right? You go and you pay this running back this replaceable position, and the teams just don't win. It's just not a winning formula. So I think last year Melvin Gordon sat out, and I don't know if it helped the situation.
Yeah, no, it was a miscalculation of the market, or maybe it wasn't. Maybe he just thought that he wanted to enter free agency in this year. I mean, we can't fault him; it's his decision to make. But he just wasn't in a leverage position, and I mean, they were offering what they thought was a fair contract. He probably was worth more, but at the end of the day, you're only worth what someone's willing to pay. I think Melvin Gordon's a good running back, a really good running back, but he's not Zeke or what Zeke was perceived to be heading into last season. So I think it's gonna be a challenge to find a spot for him at the money he wants. I think he's gonna have to choose between. I think he'll have choice of situation as well as he's willing to negotiate his money. I think that a sneaky spot for him is San Francisco. I think that, I mean, they like to collect running backs and good running backs, and I think he would thrive in that system. But again, he's not going to get $10 million a year. I think he would be fortunate to land a deal of $6.5 million, which is, again, that's like, it's going to be tough to do it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at some of his previous contracts. Like Lamar Miller last year made $6.5 million. Carlos Hyde, 2.8. In fact, Peyton Barber made $2.1 million last year. So it's I don't know. It's going to be hard pressed for him to probably make between north of 7 or 8 million would be my guess. So then I think what's interesting, we've already kind of touched on the guy last week, but a guy like Kenyan Drake, I mean, he's somebody who I think that a lot of fantasy owners were pretty high on throughout his career, but he just never really produced at the level that we expected. You were obviously super high on Kenyan Drake going into the offseason. That didn't really come to fruition while he was in Miami. But as we noted, when he was traded to the Cardinals, like he was pretty electric. Unfortunately, David Johnson is probably still going to be there just because of his contract. So it's hard to say whether or not Kenyan Drake's actually going to be back. But, that's a guy like a Matt Breida. I mean, these are kind of the lower level guys that are going to be probably asking for between $4 to $5 million. If they're lucky, they're going to get that for maybe a 2-3 year deal. And I think those are guys who, you're not going to be starting them, but maybe in a flex spot on your fantasy teams, these are guys where the position, the landing spot does matter. And they've been relevant.
It's a bad year to come out and be a free agent running back. I feel my heart and sympathies go out to Kenyan Drake, who has waited for this moment. He finally performed. I mean, on this podcast we were talking about how I thought he was a top 7 or 8 real life NFL running back, certainly a top 12 fantasy running back over the last month of the season, probably more. He was a top 3 or 4 running back. So he might gauge some interest more than the others. I mean, if you're a team and you're going to pay up for running back, you probably would rather have him at this point than Melvin Gordon. And the other one that you have on the list there is Austin Eckler. Yeah. I mean, San Diego's LA Chargers aren't going to let him go anywhere. No. I have Austin Eckler pegged as a first round pick for next year fantasy drafts. Mike Clay on ESPN has him right now currently ranked in his 3rd round. I think that's insane. Austin Eckler is the total modern day running back. And, just because he was a backup running back and we think of him like that doesn't mean he can't emerge as an every down starter. It's going to be a really interesting offseason, especially, like I said, with these top running backs available, about 4 or 5 of them that I really like a lot in the 2020 draft class.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, I'm looking here, depending on what your scoring format is, but in a full PBR, Austin Eckler finished top 5.
Yeah, he was 3 in some. I mean, he almost had 1,000 yards receiving. Without you have the stats in front of you, so don't look if you haven't. But do you know how many catches he had last year? How many receptions? Take a guess. Just take a guess.
70.
Yeah, 60? It's like It's 92.
92. Yes, that's deceptive, right?
Yeah, I mean that's crazy. Like elite receiver status. I mean he was elite at the position, and the only reason he didn't top 100 was because they really diminished his workload foolishly when Gordon came back.
Yeah. Well, I've got it here. So it was 91 receptions on 108 targets. That's pretty damn efficient. 993 yards, 8 touchdowns. Yeah. They couldn't get him 1,000 yards. Come on, guys.
Yeah, it is what it is.
All right. Okay, so let's move on. I mean, some of these other guys that are not entirely fantasy relevant, but more like a backup, like your Dwayne Washingtons, DeAndre Washington, Carlos Hyde. I mean, these are guys that are going to get signed somewhere, but you're not super excited about signing them. Like, I know that Carlos Hyde had over 1,000 yards rushing, but he just doesn't get to touchdowns. He's never going to get to touchdowns.
Houston is a lock, and I will, I would say literally as lock as you can get to spend a second round pick on a running back, because they don't have a third round pick. They foolishly ponied up a third round pick for Duke Johnson. So they're going to have to use their second on a running back, and that's their area of desperation. So
I don't want to go off too much on a tangent, but their usage of Duke Johns is just absolutely tragic.
Yeah, no, it wasn't good. It wasn't good. Why'd you spend the money on something you're not going to, they bought themselves a beautiful Apple laptop computer and then just let it collect dust.
It's disappointing. All right, let's move on to wide receiver. So Amari Cooper, what do you think? Dallas Cowboy?
Not necessarily. I mean, they could franchise. If they get a deal done with Dak, they'll franchise Amari. If they get a deal done with Amari, they'll probably franchise Dak. I don't see how they can get them both done. And you know what? His production kind of tailed off a little bit at the end. I still think Amari is a top 10 real life NFL receiver, maybe even better than that. I hope he's in Dallas. I mean, it seemed like him and Dak were good, but it wouldn't surprise me if for some reason, that he's not.
Do you ever listen to the Fantasy Footballers podcast?
I have heard their podcast before.
Okay, so I typically during the season I don't listen to them too much, but usually in the off season they have some pretty good content, and I recommend that people go check out the Fantasy Footballers podcast feed at some point, and they have this what they call the Truth series. So like there's a perceptions versus a reality, and Amari Cooper I want to say finished either 11 or 12 in terms of his ranking as a wide receiver, but in terms of consistency was closer to like the 2021 mark. And in a head-to-head type league, which is what most people play in fantasy football, that matters to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, Amari Cooper is one of these guys who he's flash and he just looks so amazing. But you start looking and breaking it down, home, away, top 16 defenses, and he folds. And you wonder if the Dallas Cowboys think that they can win a championship with him, because that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, I mean, Cowboys, right? It's going to be interesting. And, like when you talk about the wide receiver market, like, for example, there's some talk, and who knows if it's founded. I think the Browns would be foolish to trade Odell, but Odell Beckham is not a lock to start the season as a Cleveland Brown. Now, what if, a team like the Dallas Cowboys can get their hands on Odell Beckham? I mean, this is not a rumor circling around, but they've paid first round picks for wide receivers before. So yeah, it's Amari Cooper. I don't think there's any doubt about the talent. There probably is, as you noted, some consistency issues, but Amari Cooper is probably in his peak now, so there is room for him to have a more consistent season.
Well, age apex is typically for a wide receiver between 26 to 28. He is 26 right now. So we haven't seen the best of Amari Cooper. The problem with him is he's been injured for a lot of his career. So that typically has hampered his production, or expected to hamper his production. Okay, so moving on. Robbie Anderson. This is a guy that obviously disappointed this year, but he's somebody that I think we really need to talk about. He's 27 years old. I think he can still be a field stretcher, and I think they just need to feed him the ball. I mean, he just didn't work in that Jets offense last year.
He is the most intriguing free agent wide receiver for me in this year. I've talked about it a little bit, offline with you, and I definitely have talked about it on the DFS Army season-long podcast as well. Mm-hmm. And I just think that he is going to be the most underrated, or it could end up being overrated signing in a sense where the publicity gets. But if I were a team, I would be figuring out a way to get him on my team. He's one of those guys that he just makes everyone better. He takes the top off the defense. He's been a little bit disappointment in that offense, but think about how many wide receivers have disappointed in an Adam Gase offense. There was a time the season before last where Robbie Anderson was scoring a touchdown in every game. I think a team like Philadelphia would be a really interesting spot for Robbie Anderson. Deshaun Jackson just could not stay healthy. He's probably toast at this point. Those speed receivers, those like small ones, have trouble staying healthy, it seems like. I don't have any scientific information, but John Ross and those type of receivers. So
think about it. I mean, these guys who are under the 200-pound threshold, you get hit by some of these big linebackers. If I was out there, I would be dead on one hit. I would not survive.
Right. Yeah, but generally those guys aren't in the part of the field where the big giant linebackers are. So, but yeah, I mean, even a 190-pound cornerback that's 6'2" gives you a hit. It's just your bone construction is not made to absorb those hits mostly, generally. But yeah, I would like to see Robbie Anderson end up with a good quarterback, and I still think Carson Wentz is one of the best in the game.
I just think like with a guy like Robbie Anderson, he could have the sort of impact like that a Will Fuller has for Deshaun Watson, right? Where when he's on the field versus off the field, there's a dramatic change in how productive a team is and how productive a quarterback is. So that'd be interesting. I mean, there's a bunch of old guys on here like Emmanuel Sanders. I mean, obviously AJ Green. I don't know if we really want to talk too much about these guys other than the fact that
if AJ Green is, even 80% of himself, he's going to be a really good signing for a team. The team that I would think that needs him the most is a team like the Green Bay Packers. I mean, those ancillary guys, they kind of came through last week, but that's only relative to what they were doing all season. It was Devontae Adams, and then those guys have just not performed. The Marquez Valdez-Scantling, the Allen Lazard, you just can't have those guys be your number two. I mean, there's going to be a lot of teams interested in AJ Green, especially if he proves to be healthy. But I think that a team like Green Bay, where AJ Green can be a 1A-ish, doesn't have to be a 130 target per player anymore. It could be a 110 target player. But I still am interested in AJ Green for fantasy if he comes back healthy and obviously with a good QB. He's going to have his pick of spots. I mean, you could see him end up in New England, or he's going to play for a contender at this point of his career.
But doesn't he kind of remind you of like a Demaryius Thomas or like a Dez Bryant, or they just hit this wall, these big body wide receivers that just hit wall and that's it?
Yeah, no, that's a great comparison. But again, I'm not looking for AJ Green to. My expectation isn't him to be a top 3 or 4 or 5 receiver in the NFL anymore. I think that he will settle in fantasy as like a good 4th round pick or a late 3rd round pick if he's healthy and in a good team. And my expectation is managed. It's I mean, who would you rather have in fantasy at this point? Would you rather have Odell Beckham? Would you rather have Juju Smith-Schuster, young, ascending, Ben coming back, or would you rather have AJ Green that is in the opposite part of his career? It's a hard decision. It's a hard decision.
Yeah, maybe. I think most people would probably err on Juju, but I don't think that's ever going to really be a conversation.
Yeah,
if AJ Green, comes back and he's on a somewhat fantasy relevant team, probably the 6th or 7th round, I bet, was where he gets drafted. It's like not super risky, but there's upside. But
you tell me,
maybe propelled earlier.
You tell me if he lands in Green Bay and he's with Aaron Rodgers and Devontae Adams on the other side, you see him lasting to the 7th round? I don't see it, man. I think
no, you're right, but I'm not saying that's the right thing. If he ends up in Green Bay, he's probably going to be drafted in the 5th or 6th. I think early, probably 5th round. To me, that's way too damn early.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with that, but we'll see. We'll see how ADP shakes out over when early best ball season starts.
Okay, so there's a huge list here, guys. I definitely recommend you follow the link here, but there's 3 guys that I want to just quickly shoot off. So there's Brashad Perriman, Demarcus Robinson, and Zach Pascal. These are 3 guys that had their moments throughout the year, and like Zach Pascal, I feel like he stepped up pretty good for Indy, but he fell off a cliff when T.Y. Hilton got back. Obviously, Brashad Perriman, what the hell, man? Like, people were just crying in their fantasy playoffs when Brashad Perriman was going off when Chris Godwin was just on your bench injured. It was crazy.
Yeah, Brashad Perriman following the 5th year breakout pattern that Devontae Parker fell into. Yeah, I mean, Brashad Perriman was basically written off out of the fantasy lexicon, out of the NFL, and he probably has earned himself a nice contract for next year, and he looked good doing it. So, I'm in on Brashad Perriman. He'll be a perfectly good 8th round, 9th round pick next year, depending on where he goes. I like it. Zach Pascal, great. I think he's a competent NFL player. He won't cost you much in fantasy, but for a real team, he's only going into his 3rd year. I mean, he's a rock solid player. He could bust out big. I mean, he looked like a guy that goes after it in the red zone. I think he went to college at Old Dominion, and I remember just looking back a little bit, if my memory serves me correct, he was a guy that just snatched the ball and bullied people. Almost built like how we see Deebo Samuel built. He's got a nose for the ball, tough player. So I'm interested in him as well. And the third player that you asked about was Brashad Perryman. And then who was the last guy you asked about?
Oh, of course. I just
It was Perryman.
it was
you asked about like Demarcus Robinson.
Demarcus Robinson, excuse me. Yeah, sorry.
I have no interest in him.
No, I mean, he's too inconsistent. If you're not going to get it done in a KC offense, like that's it. You're dead to me. All right. So just real quick, Zach Pascal, 6'2", 219 pounds.
Yeah, it's a bull.
Old Dominion, you're correct.
Yeah.
25 years old. Okay, so let's move on finally to tight end position. So nothing too crazy here. I don't think there's like obviously the top two, Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper. These guys are staying put.
You tell me. Are you draft? Hunter Henry was a top 4 or 5 tight end this year. Where do you think he gets drafted? I mean, I was relatively disappointed. I owned him in a couple places. I mean, do you see him as tight end what and in what round in fantasy next year?
Oh man. So yeah, Hunter Henry, he had his moments, but I think that the entire LA offense had its moments, right? Up and down. I bet you Hunter Henry probably goes in like the 7th round. I mean, he still has his name value. I think people are still pretty high on him. He's only 25 years old. It's going to depend on his situation. I mean, if he ends up back in LA and they have a competent quarterback throwing in the ball, I think that's going to continue. I would be shocked.
Yeah, I mean, who are the tight ends you would take ahead of Hunter Henry in fantasy?
Obviously, Kelsey, Kittle, probably Mark Andrews.
Yep.
And then I would consider Austin Hooper over Hunter Henry, depending on your format.
And still Zach Ertz, right?
I don't know if I'd take Zach Ertz. I think Dallas Goedert is going to usurp him this year.
Okay, so
the 10-1 on that team.
Fair enough. And then how about Evan Ingram? Would you take him ahead of Hunter Henry?
Probably that's the decision point right there. It's Austin Hooper, Hunter Henry, Evan Ingram for me.
Yeah, I mean, tight end is going to be really interesting. Again, it's tight end is always get someone at the top or just wait and figure it out. And sometimes that works out, sometimes it doesn't. Jared Cook had his moments last year, but someone that I'm going to be interested in at tight end, you're going to hear me talk about this a lot over the offseason, and he's going to be priced at like tight end 10, is I'm going to be trying to scoop up as much Tyler Higbee as possible.
I knew you were going to say Tyler Higbee.
Yeah, I mean, that's when we talk about fantasy, he might end up getting pushed up, but if he's going in the 7th, 8th round as tight end 10, that's the one I'm going to be zeroing in on. He just he finished I don't want to get too much off the free agents, but he just went bananas at the end of the year. They paid him as such. And Hunter Henry, again, he'll be lost in that zone right there. He'll probably be overdrafted, especially the QB situations in flux. But it's an interesting discussion looking ahead.
I think just, to put a bow really on the tight end discussion here, it's next year. I don't think it's going to be a wasteland. There's probably about 7 or 8 competent tight ends that you'd be comfortable with. It's where if you just completely fade tight end is where you might get in trouble. But Eric Ebron, Vance McDonald, are they going to be fantasy relevant ever again, or are they dead?
I'm still, Ebron has a chance. I mean, he did have that crazy breakout season did happen, if Vance McDonald, it never happened. So I'm not going to be interested in him, but Ebron, again, it didn't go well. You'll be able to get him at the end of your drafts next year. And depending on where is he a free agent? Is that why you're asking?
He's on the list.
Yeah. I mean, he could what if he ends up in New England with Tom Brady and the whole crew's back, I mean, you'd be interested in Eric Ebron in that sense. I mean,
Ebron going on to his 3rd team potentially. He's still only 27 years old.
Yeah, no,
That's crazy.
He ends up in a system where they use the tight end, where he could just do what he does, which is pass catching. And Ebron did. It's again, he owns that skill set of that breakout. That did happen.
Absolutely. Okay, so that's it. Those are all the guys that I want to talk about. Is there anybody that jumps out to you that you think is worth discussing, or should we wrap this puppy up?
Yeah, we can wrap it up. I mean, if I was looking across positionally, I think that one of the free agents, and I think we mentioned his name, but I think it really has an effect on Nick Chubb where Kareem Hunt ends up. I can see a situation where the Browns just say, "Hey, we want 2 running backs," because if Kareem Hunt is stays in Cleveland, I don't even think I could take Nick Chubb until the very end of the 2nd round, maybe the 3rd round next year. But if Kareem Hunt leaves and it's Nick Chubb's job, Nick Chubb is a top 4 fantasy pick. So like he is, And I have him in a couple leagues where I have to decide on him as a keeper. So I'm interested in where Kareem Hunt goes. I think Kareem Hunt can go in and be an every down back in these places. So that's the free agent that I'm going to be keeping a closest eye on.
So obviously Stefanski, coming from the Vikings, he used Dalvin Cook and used him well. So yeah, absolutely. If Nick Chubb is the guy, I would argue that he's a first-round pick going into next year.
I mean, a high first-round pick.
High first-round pick, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, Al, so that's it. So where can people find you on Twitter?
At Alan Seslowsky, AlanSeslowsky. Tweet at me. We're doing tons of podcasts. So here at the Flex Network, we're doing them with our other friends over at DFS Army, and also the Beat the Bookie podcast I do with professional gambler John Alicia. That's one worth checking out if you were into sports wagering.
I love that. You know, I'm not really into sports betting, but I still tune in every single week when you guys put that out, just because it's so relevant, and it is relevant to fantasy sports as well. So that's really cool.
And John is just, brilliant at his craft. So even though I'm on it with him, I just sit there. I'm a fan of his. So.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's literally won millions of dollars in gambling.
Yeah,
correct?
That I'm not correcting you because you are right, and including taking, millions of dollars in sports wagering, and he's taken down tons of DFS contests. He just took down 50,000 about a week and a half ago in NBA, and it was like, oh yeah, I took down this contest, and it was he's just a master of figuring out games.
Look, people, if you're into sports gambling, if you're into DFS, you have to check out DFS Army. I mean, in January they've won something like $4 million in total winnings with their patrons right now. It's absolutely crazy. So you can obviously follow me at Sealy_Shane. Follow us on Twitter at the Flex Network 1. I am Shane Sealy. This is Alan Seslowsky. We are the Flex Network.